Hi, Dad.
Hi. Is it on?
It's on.
Okay.
Today is December
28th.
2009. How you doing?
I'm well.
How was work today?
It was alright. It wasn't anything exceptional.
Dad, when were you born?
July 29th, 1954.
And where were you born?
Rupert, Idaho. Across the river from where my parents lived.
How far is Rupert from Burley?
It's probably 6 miles or 7 miles.
Okay.
My father didn't like the doctor in Burley who had told my mother not to have any more kids, so he changed doctors. And I was born in Rupert, along with my sister Ann, I think, and the younger kids in the family.
What is your earliest memory?
Can I have some ice cream?
Okay. So you were born in Rupert, Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
That's 6 or 7 miles from Burley. What's your earliest memory?
Strange as it sounds, probably getting out of the bathtub and sitting on a hot heater. I just ran into somebody last year who filled in the details. Our house was just, the house that my parents live in was just finished the year before I was born, and it was still unfinished and apparently didn't have central heating installed. And as a young infant, I'd gotten out of the tub where it was warm, and they had a little space heater there, and I sat on it and burned myself so bad I had to wear a dress for a couple of weeks. And I ran into a man, Mr. Badger, who I'd never met before, who was telling me about it. So that's probably the earliest memory I have.
How old were you at the time?
Maybe 2, I don't know the age.
And did you grow up in that same house that Grandma and Grandpa live now?
I always lived there all my life until I left for college.
Where did you fit into the family?
I'm 7th out of 9, and the 3rd in a row of 3, my older brother John and my sister Ann and then me. So John was a senior and Ann was a junior and I was a sophomore.
What do you remember about growing up in your house? When I say that, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Made beds on Friday and structure. My mother is a super organized person. I never really realized how much until I left. I always had a new bed on every Friday, and every day of the week we had chores to do. And during the 8 years that I took music lessons, I had to practice the piano, each piece at least 3 times before I was allowed to go to school, as well as do my chores, whether it was milking a cow in the morning or washing the dishes or whatever. And that was a rule of thumb. That's just the way the home operated.
Okay. So Grandma made your bed every Friday?
Yeah, she changed the sheets every Friday.
When you were, do you have many memories from before you started kindergarten, before you started school?
Yeah, I do. My father had bought a mining company in central Idaho, and the Bradley Mining Company, as I've come to learn it, because I was so young, it was all a whirl at the time, and he, as part of that acquisition, he bought the entire town of what's called Stibnite, Idaho. It was a subrate ore mining company that was important during World War II, and since he owned the town, he was moving the houses. Some of the housing went down to BYU, and some of the housing went to McCall, Idaho. And it was about an hour from McCall in a very dangerous jungle, kind of. It seemed like a jungle, but a forest area with narrow roads. And we moved up the summer I was 5, because I never went to kindergarten. The summer I was 5, we moved up as a whole family into that community and lived in the best house in the community. And it was an adventuresome time because there's all these vacant houses with things in them. And so my brothers are all finding things, and there was a bowling alley, there was a airport, there was a hospital that my brother burnt part of the wing on. And it just seemed like adventure land. It's hard to almost chronicle, but at that time is when my father had the boom fall on his toe, and he was hospitalized over an hour away, and my sister Catherine was left to watch me, and since my mom was gone, I went upstairs and lit a match and burned down the house.
How much do you remember of that?
As much as I want. Nobody knew for years who did it. It was up in the attic. I guess there was oily rags and stuff. I do remember Catherine saving, it seemed like Cocoa Puffs and the sewing machine. That was about all. I lost all my childhood pictures. Almost all the childhood stuff I had was burned as a result of that. Didn't realize at the time how devastating a time it was for my father and my mother, because Stibnite was not going well for my dad anyway. He'd lost a house down the canyon, had fallen down the canyon. Some things had gone wrong, and he had major losses, close to $50,000 that took him years and years and years to pay off. And as a consequence, put our family in a financially vulnerable situation that I couldn't have imagined, changed the way we ate, the way we did everything for years.
So it wasn't just that you burned down a house.
No, it was just the whole sequence of events, including burning down the one house.
You said that nobody found out about it for years.
For some reason, it never really came up. My mother had been with my father, and I don't know if they blamed Catherine, but maybe 12 years or 13 years after the fact, it came up in discussion, and I said, yeah, I'd lit a match. I was 5, I think, at the time.
What happened when you admitted that it was you?
Nothing. I mean, it's not like there was more guilt or anything. It's not something that you look fondly back on. I mean, I lost a lot. No photographic record almost of me from age, from birth to 5 years of age. I remember I had a nice airplane blanket my mom had made for me too that I lost, and brothers all lost stuff. And Stibnite, still in my family, if you mention Stibnite, Charles and Stephen, and just ignites memories just way beyond that can even fit into a chapter. And it's a ghost town now. It's on the Idaho Registry. And Stephen's been back a couple of times. My dad's wanted to go back. I mean, it's just a very unusual period of time that we lived in. And due to my father's ventures, just hard to explain to people.
Yeah. Buying a whole town sounds difficult to explain to people.
He paid cash, which even makes it the fact that he'd been so successful just to that point. My father was a risk taker, and my mom came from a non-risk-taking family. The Hankses were so fiscally conservative, and my dad was so fiscally liberal and a gambler. And Stephen tells a story that my dad, I mean, they didn't even know, the miners didn't even know this town had been sold. My dad went up there and simply said, hey, I own this place now. And that nobody had known that. So, yeah. It had a little airport my dad used to fly into. Very difficult to land because the higher elevation, you can only land at certain points. Anyway.
What was Grandpa doing before that generated so much cash?
He's always been an entrepreneur, kind of wheeled and dealed, bought things. I know at one point he maybe it was that he'd bought government housing at Hunt. You know, the old not prisoner of war, but the old encampments where they put the Japanese during World War II. I think he'd bought some of those in Hunt, Idaho, and moved those to Provo for housing, several things like that. He just kind of saw opportunity and took a chance.
You touched on, how long were you in Stibnite?
I was just there the one summer, but I think my dad was there 2 years, or maybe 3 before. He simply one day folded up his tools and said, "That's it." Walked away. He said he felt like the world was lifted off of his shoulders because he didn't know what to do, and he just took the loss. And my mom taught music lessons for years just to try to help soften the blow of the death.
Hmm. You mentioned organization and made beds on Friday, but describe what you can about the family, your family life growing up, those early years.
I had enormous love and respect for my older brother Charles, who's 10 years older than I am. When I went to first grade, they were building Dworshak High School, named after Senator Dworshak, and I was one of the first graders in Dworshak. But there was probably a 3-month period where the school wasn't finished, and so we did first grade at the high school. And my older brother was in high school at the time. Charles just always seemed to be larger than life to me, and so as an older brother, I mean, he went on a mission to Brazil, and he went to BYU, and you know, he always sort of was kind to me, but there's all the infighting of lots of siblings always arrived, you know, the tensions of just getting along with siblings.
How did your parents govern the house? Can you describe that dynamic?
Yeah, iron fist. If you were in trouble, my dad knew it. You got whacked very, 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 very hardly. I remember there was a 7th grader at the time, I think it was 7th or 8th grade, and I was supposed to go to Mutual and wanted to go to a football game, and I went to the football game instead of to Mutual and went home and hurried up and went to bed. Well, my dad pulled me out of bed and hit me. So I could see the laces from the belt on my legs for probably 2 weeks. I mean, my mother was not a great, she was not the discipliner my dad was. She would tell us to go out and get a willow and then chase us around the table. But my dad was brutal when he disciplined you. So when he said jump, you jumped. You absolutely jumped. And he was gone. Seemed like he was always gone. So my mother really raised us in so many ways. Dad was always around, but always seemed to be off doing something else. And so Mom did almost all the day-to-day and the looking after the details. So.
What was the what was the relationship like between your mom and dad?
Never heard my mom ever say an unkind thing. Never really heard them argue. I mean, just enormous regard always my mom for what my dad said. I never got a sense that they were disunified in what they said. And that was probably hardest for me when I got married and thought that we weren't always on the same page, I didn't think. Because I don't remember my mom and dad ever being publicly on different pages. My dad would say something, that was it. And that was the course that we were going to take.
Why do you think that was?
My mom's ability to be one and unified with what my dad said. I think that's one of the great characteristics of her ability to stand behind him, even though it might have been difficult given the gambling nature of what he was doing in comparison to what she was used to.
Did you have many? You said that it seemed like your dad was gone a lot.
He was.
Did you notice that growing up?
I can remember he watched me play football once, Little League football once. Hardly ever remember him ever going to anything I was involved with. Almost never. Was never sure how much he even knew about what I was doing sometimes. I'm sure he did, but never got that sense that he was as actively involved in things I was doing as, you know, as my mom was or my brothers.
Did you miss that growing up?
I think hindsight, yeah. I think all of us still yearn for my father's approval. I think that's been something we've all had to deal with as growing up, wanting to have his approval and have him say, well done, or I'm proud of you, or something of that nature.
And you mentioned it a little bit with respect to discipline, but what was your dad's what was his relationship like with you and with the rest of your siblings?
My dad was never thought my dad ever did anything wrong. It never occurred to me he didn't know everything, because that was what he was. He was larger than life, always seemed to be so much smarter than everybody else, or more spiritual, or more in tune. It never occurred to me that Dad had human frailties until I was older and could see that. And so I never questioned my dad knew what he was doing. And ironically, as we look back on it now, all the times we did work projects, my brothers and I did all the work, and he watched most of the time. And at the time, it didn't occur to me that he wasn't as hands-on as maybe others were. When we had families in the ward who were lovey and friendly and stuff, usually we kind of scoffed because we were a little bit cynical about things like that, perhaps to our detriment. And my dad always said he'd rather have us respect him than love him, and that was the way he was and is. The love would come after the respect, and learning how to work and kind of learning to get on your own 2 feet.
Growing up, do you have any memorable interactions that you had with him?
Oh.
Apart from the belt?
Yeah, a couple times he would mention sports things. Thing that Dad never called attention to some things, and you know, I'd fallen in love with sports when I was 6 years old, because Charles had kind of one day we were in the room right next to the garage, and we called it a garage, and we were rolling newspapers for fire logs, Charles and I, and he showed me a box score, and he showed me Kenny Hubbs' name in the box score of the Chicago Cub lineup. Kenny Hubbs was a Mormon kid from California who played for the Cubs, was a second baseman, and he showed me how to read a box score, or it appeared he did. I don't think Charles could read a box score today, but so the Cubs became my team, and I started following sports and sort of threw myself into sports and became very involved listening to games every night, because we didn't have a television until I was 16 years of age. And I would listen to a ball game every night of the week, especially as I got my own room downstairs and got a radio for my birthday, for Christmas. And in 1969, my dad took us east on a vacation, and July 30th, 1969, he took me to Wrigley Field for my birthday, the day after. Cubs lost 4-2 to the Giants.
So you guys drove all the way out there?
On the way to New York and to Washington, D.C., yeah. And Dad would mention subtle things about sports once in a while. I grew up just so passionate about BYU, basketball, football, you know, listening to every one of their games. And Charles got me a program because he had a friend who was a journalist down there, and you know, anyway. So, and occasionally Dad took me to football games. You know, we went to see BYU a couple of times.
You mentioned, was it because of Ken Hubbs, you said?
Yeah,
that
Kenny
you
Hubbs.
started liking
He died,
Cubs?
He died after his rookie year. He had a plane crash on Utah Lake. He'd set a record for the best fielding second baseman of all time until Ryne Sandberg came around. But he was rookie of the year and a great kid, and died after his rookie year.
And is he the reason the Cubs became your team?
Yeah, he was.
So that's what started it all. Huh?
And then, of course, I became familiar with Ernie Banks, and Ernie Banks became such a great person. And I've seen Ernie. I've never had a chance to interview him. I missed him at the Hall of Fame the one time I covered the Hall of Fame. And when I got old enough, I had a paper out. I started buying the Sporting News, and I got it every week and would read. You know, anyway. So.
Describe what it was. What you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but what was the dynamic like with your mom growing up and interacting with her? What was she like?
Supportive as all get out in so many ways. Just almost like a security blanket. Mom's always been good. And when she comes into a situation, she immediately reads it and helps, rather than asking and analyzing on the sideline. And that's kind of the way she is. She always was involved in doing service first, whether she was transcribing a book for somebody or helping somebody put something together. That's always been my mom. And I think in watching that through the years, I sort of saw the way other people reacted with her and realized, you know, some things about her that I wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Like what?
How important it is to preserve things, to write things down, to maybe be faithful in your calling. She was Relief Society president, I don't know how many times, and primary president. Always did music and led choirs, and just always seemed to be indispensable in church. And you know, when I was a youth, we had a youth genealogy class. We had a youth choir. And I don't remember ever seeing a youth choir in another ward. And we went because they had treats at the end of choir, but we sang and, you know, we did things with youth because my mom organized them and made it happen. So.
Where did you get this? Is it from your mom that you got this drive to record things?
I think part of it is seeing what Mom's done. Part of it's innate too. Just seemed to be a day, you know, during a frustrating time there in Ilion, when I was dropping the kids off in the morning, I would either clean the church or I would go for a walk, and was really trying to find where my spot was and everything, and I'd seemed to have failed in my journalistic career at that point, I thought anyway. And it just occurred to me I was trying to negotiate with the Lord as to what I could possibly offer and give him that would be of value. And I said, well, if I can't do anything else, I can write things down. And then the occurrence with your marriage and writing down that story, and it just seemed to accelerate. And I realized that most of my life I'd been geared to do this, even if I hadn't had the inclination. Once I opened the door, then promptings came, and when you follow promptings, more promptings came, and more settings came. I would have seemed the most unlikely person at the time to do that, but as I look back now, I realize it's not that way, because in 8th grade, I had taken a typing class and became proficient. I won a certificate in 8th grade for typing 40 words a minute or less with one mistake or less. And so I used to take the Sporting News. When I got a typewriter for the first time, I think I was in 10th grade, I got a typewriter of my own, and I would type the Chicago Cubs thing on paper. So I had all this scrapbook, and so I guess I thought I was good at typing, and I knew that my mom did stuff like that, so I think it just kind of rubbed off. And as I've seen my siblings now, Catherine's written a book, and what Charles is doing, I mean, it is because of my mother's influence and my grandmother Hanks's influence that that's happened.
When did you start writing a journal?
Seriously, not until my mission. And then, you know, post-mission just became obvious to my way of learning that journal writing was important as part of the growth experience, you know, and remembering things.
Describe a typical day for you growing up from start to end. What time would you wake up?
Depending on if I had a paper out or not, because I always had a paper out from about the time I was 10, or 9 or 10. For 6 months I worked with my brother John. For $2 a month I helped deliver half his papers. I realized what a sucker I was. But he delivered an afternoon paper, he delivered the Times News. And for a while, then I got my own Times News route. And then, when I got a little older, I had a Deseret News and a Salt Lake Tribune route. So I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and delivered the papers. And so I would finish maybe 5:15, 5:20, come home and get ready for school. You know.
What'd you usually eat for breakfast growing up?
Cracked wheat.
Cracked wheat?
Yeah.
Would you have it with milk or any sugar
Oh,
or anything?
absolutely. Milk, tons of sugar, because it's not palatable otherwise. In fact, you know, you can hardly look at cracked wheat now without, you know, wanting to gag.
Why did you guys eat cracked wheat? Was it all you could afford?
Yeah, yeah. I've mentioned before we had cereal one time a year. That was on Christmas. Until I was in the late teen years, you know, and then my mom started buying shredded wheat. But cereal was kind of the symbol of status, very much like a TV was, and we didn't have that.
Did you feel like you were poor growing up?
Not really. The only time I really felt vulnerable was school, and when we didn't have money for school fees, that was always a big thing. Big thing to be able to pay your school fees. That was huge and humiliating. See, I seem to have everything going for me. Going to Dvorak and loving Dvorak and was good at stuff there. But in the 6th grade, they transferred me because they had too many students to the poor school in town, Miller School, and so I lost, you know, I went to the bad school for a year before getting to junior high, and that seemed to be something I could never get over as far as being in the in crowd again. So.
You didn't have any money for school fees. What were school fees?
Oh, $30 maybe, something like that.
A year?
Yeah. Or I don't even know what the amount was. And it was mortifying, I remember, go to school and have homemade shirts or hand-me-downs. I must not have had new things to take to school, because I think that's kind of where this thing about having school supplies came from. This wanting to have school supplies so I'd never be mortified. And I noticed Charles has the same thing with shoes, because he had shoes, they had cardboard inserts he would put in. He always was buying shoes there for a while, just so he always had shoes. But realistically, we lived on a hill. My father always drove a nice car and had the appearance of money when we had none.
Why do you think that was?
That was my dad's image. He always had nice suits. Always, because he was in political circles. So he always, people thought we had what we never really had. So.
What was dinner time like for you guys?
Potatoes and whatever vegetable, some variation of potatoes and chores. Dishes to be washed, cow to milk and feed, strain the milk, maybe churn butter, churn many times. When I was growing up, my mom would read to us. She'd get in the couch and somebody would comb her hair. She liked to have her hair combed and brushed, and she read Call the Wild, I think Moby Dick, all kinds of stuff to us.
Would all of you
Yeah.
sit around?
Yeah, great deal of us. And then they had this great big stereo radio, you know, in the living room too, that I would sometimes turn on late at night and listen to BYU basketball or football or whatever was on. If it was during the week, I'd listen to Drake, Texas Tech, USC, UCLA, San Francisco, whatever, whoever I could find.
So did you eat meals together as a family?
Yes, absolutely ate meals together as a family and prayed. We would kneel down before the meal, and we'd kneel down on a chair there and have family prayers. That's when we had our family prayers. Yeah. It was a big deal to eat together, except for on Sundays.
What would you do when you came home from school?
Usually deliver papers or collect, you know, because since we had paper routes, we always had to collect. So sometimes when you finished your paper route, you had to go back out collecting. And my paper route was probably 3.5 to 4 miles in distance for a bike from where we were, so we're always chasing that. And then maybe play with myself. It's strange to see Peter playing with himself and doing things, because those are the same things I did. I announced the game, so.
So when you say play, you shoot baskets or something?
Oh, I'd shoot baskets, and they have a little concrete barrier, you know, the back. I would hit the Super Ball against it and play baseball against that, you know, depending on how the ball bounced, or golf balls, or, you know, always did something like that.
Were you playing by yourself, or did any siblings join in?
Most of the time, when I was young, I was playing by myself. When I got to be a teenager, I organized a little neighborhood basketball league and made trophies out of old laundry things. You know, you cut them in the middle and mount them. Yeah, but that was when I was a little older. But yeah, I mostly played with myself.
What was your interaction like with your siblings growing up?
John was always, you know, I was always on the church basketball teams with John. I mean, contentious, depending on what was happening. I used to play with John somewhat, but John's in another stratosphere, and as he got older, his eyes were always peeled on rocks or money or whatever he could find on the ground. And he was, so I'd say from junior high on, it was just mostly me, by myself, and my baseball or my basketball or football games at night by myself.
Where were your other siblings?
Doing stuff, reading stuff. It's like Anne read books almost every night. Always, just always reading, coming, going. When you have 9 kids, though, I mean, there's not a lack of activity. So, and church, you know, we had church, we had 3 meetings on Sunday, we had primary during the week, or young men's and young women's during the week, and so everything revolved around church too.
Were there any clear alliances among your siblings, or you said it was contentious? Was it every man for himself, or?
Oh, a little bit. I mean, I revered Charles greatly. Stephen always kind of took me under his wing, and I worked for him when he was older a bit. I don't know that I ever really got along very well with Gordon. Anne was always kind of close. She's just a year older than I was, and had the heart issues. And the first time I ever fasted was the day she had her heart operation. Really fasted, and had a significant experience. And so I always felt. And Ellen was younger. And Paul, I sort of tried to do what Charles did with Paul. You know, Charles did with me. I kind of shepherded him a little bit.
How much older are you than Paul?
6 years. No, 5 years. He was born in 1959.
You mentioned Anne's heart operation. Can you describe that?
Yeah, I guess it's part of not being cued into the family. She had a congenital heart issue and had a hole in her heart, and time came, I think, maybe I was sixth grade, seventh grade, where her heart would start pounding like a hammer, and it became obvious that she had a serious problem. She went and saw Dr. Russell Nelson, and they said they would operate on her, and so the whole ward had a fast. And I can remember delivering papers that day, how hot it was, and I was fasting. For the first time really fasting instead of just going without a meal, and how good it felt to be part of the effort. To have the miracle of her living, my father had had a family picture taken of the whole family. Didn't think she was going to make it when we first went through all of this. And she came home a week later.
What do you remember the rest of the family's reaction or activities surrounding that being?
That's part of the disaster, you know, the difficulty of youth is not ever really much getting beyond what your own perception is. You know, it was pretty obvious that it was a significant thing for a family as time has gone by and we've talked about it among ourselves. Probably one of the first times some of the barriers come down and there's really fond and deep emotion for somebody or something.
What kind of traditions did you guys have in your family growing up?
Well, there's holiday traditions, there's the daily tradition, as I say, the chores and things. Work is done first and then activity after. Always work first. And tradition of Christmas, you know, not any one specific thing. My mother's big thing about Halloween, how we never ever were allowed to go trick-or-treating. Once we went trick or tricking where we gave people treats. I can remember them taking a family that had burned down, and you know, we had Indian placement students for 4 years, I think, in the house, where we opened the house, you know, had a student living with us. Church was our biggest tradition, though. We went to church and did everything at church.
You mentioned Halloween. That
Yeah.
was it your mom that wouldn't
That's my
allow it?
mom. She felt like, and still feels like it was begging.
Was that an uncommon thing at the time where you were living?
Very much so. Very much so. Very against the trend.
And so what did you guys do then to celebrate Halloween? What would you do on Halloween?
Stayed home, or went to the church party that we had.
What about Christmas? What would you guys do on Christmas? What were your Christmas traditions?
We would usually, you know, we'd have the church activity. We would go caroling. My parents always flocked the tree. Always would get a tree and flock it. And my mother always had a theme tree. Changed colors every year. They were always stunningly gorgeous. I can remember, John, my parents' bedroom has built-in cabinets on the back above the closets. I think that's where they hid Christmas stuff. And you were not allowed to go in my parents' bedroom, period, if they were there, unless they invited you in. And the one year John and I were bunking together, you know, always changed bedrooms. You always shared a bedroom with somebody until almost my last years there. I always had a bedroom shared with somebody. And he snuck some presents out and we unwrapped them. Maybe a week ahead of time, and there were several times I tried to sneak into their bedroom when they weren't there and look in the upper things just to see what it was. That was terrible, terrible. That Christmas, though, in some ways. We would look at the Montgomery Ward's catalog. That was our big outlet to look for things, and go through the catalog and see what we wanted, and ask for this or for that.
Did you grow up believing in Santa Claus?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a fun tradition. My mother read all kinds of Christmas stories to us. Always some really touching Christmas stories about giving and about faith and, you know, believing goodness and stuff.
You said you were terrible about Christmas.
Yeah, I was a complainer. Seemed like I never got what I wanted for some reason or another. I can remember taking the phone call where Montgomery Ward's called and said that a hockey game I'd asked for, you know, leaving a message for my dad, was not available. And it just seemed like I had a period like for 3 or 4 years where I never got what I wanted. And when I was old enough that I was working retail, I think I was 14 or 15 after I gave up paper routes, and I was working at King's, I knew the price of everything. And as Stephen would say, I could go and tell exactly how much they'd spent on everybody. And so, probably overcompensating for that, I've been so conscious of trying to be equal in the amount that I've spent on all my kids, especially the triplets. You know, try to be fair, and fairness has always been a big thing.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything you guys always did on Christmas Eve or Christmas morning?
Yeah, we would get up maybe 3 or 4 in the morning and wait. Christmas stockings, it was always nuts and maybe an orange and maybe, you know, hardtack candy. And then we had cereal. We had cold cereal on Christmas morning. Sometimes those little packs, you know, where you open up. That was Christmas morning breakfast. That was pretty neat. That was always so fun. It seemed like it anyway at the time. Not nearly the traditions we have now as developed as our family has become, but yeah.
When you were up at 3 or 4 in the morning, were your parents up with you?
No. No, they left presents unwrapped in part. So, you know, a bike or something would be unwrapped. You'd be able to see it.
Mm-hmm. You said you had, was it one cow that you guys had?
Yeah, had a cow and a calf. Usually would have a calf, and then we had a Shetland pony as well in a corral just to the side of the house there. It's now been taken down. Yeah. So there was always hay to do. There was always the cow to milk. We had the cow until we went on the vacation in 1969. She was a Guernsey, a Jersey, not a Jersey, a Guernsey, which are heavy on cream and not so much on milk. And she would always calve about every year. So we always usually had a calf or a cow, you know, the cow, plus the Shetland pony to feed and take care of. And sometimes in the summer we would do fences because we'd put the cow out to pasture a little bit and have to put up the fence and, you know, watch the cow and stuff. Not the big time experience of farming, but enough, you know.
Did you guys play Risk much growing up?
Almost every Sunday. Risk and Authors and I don't remember what other games. Never realized how competitive my family was. Absolutely competitive. Absolutely competitive. Risk was the pinnacle point of that competition, but even when I had little electrical baseball games or electric football games or whatever, always competitive. Always. And especially as we got older, you know, Sunday nights or nights, because you didn't have TV, you'd read or you'd play games, and then my parents still do that. Wow.
Where do you think this competitiveness came from?
My dad. My dad's competitive. My mom is not. Too soft-hearted. Plus, you know, sometimes just having meals, we thought it was a big deal when we had tuna in a salad. That was meat, because we hardly ever had meat. Hardly ever. So if you got a speck of tuna, man, you really were doing well. And sometimes we'd even have hot dogs, and that was just like over-the-top meat. And so if you didn't get your portion early on, you didn't get it. So you kind of had to scrap just to even have something to eat sometimes, because it wasn't like they set stuff aside for you. How'd
you do at school growing up?
Actually, I had no idea that when I went to school I didn't have kindergarten, that I was so much further ahead of everybody. I did really well, I thought, but I never occurred to me I was doing well or badly until I think the second or third grade at a school thing, Miss Warner, I think her name was, told my mom I'd had the second highest score in the school for some aptitude test, and I was doing badly, so we made an arrangement where I washed walls if I didn't get certain grades. But that's probably where a little more attention from my parents would have helped. I was allowed to be mediocre, you know, from maybe the 4th or 5th grade on, and really be mediocre when I went to junior high. John was always brilliant, you know, and I never really got much support or recognition or lack of academic funding. So I underachieved.
Why do you think you didn't get much support?
It wasn't, there's just too many things to pay attention to. Sometimes, and with the difficulty with a lot of kids is giving specific attention to people on things that mean or could mean a lot to them. And that's where your peer system can be so helpful. I just never, school wasn't that important to me. It should have been more important to me than it was.
Any memories that stick out to you about grade school?
Oh, I can remember they had track, some sort of competition in 6th grade and qualifying to do the broad jump at the county event and the softball throw or some other things. Just totally getting psyched out. I think part of the difficulty with me athletically was getting to the point where I was psyched out by people because I didn't have enough self-confidence. And a lot of that self-confidence came again from that shift in 5th grade to 6th grade, you know, where we won the basketball championship, I think, when I was in 6th grade. I was on that team. I had a picture of myself. I had my shirt on backwards. But yeah, I just didn't have a ton of self-confidence, and as a result, I didn't compete when I would have really wanted to, you know, play and do things and be good at things.
Any teachers that stuck out to you from grade school?
Not that was significant, no. I mean, I could tell you the names of some of them, but none of them that said anything so sterling or sparkling that came back to, you know, to bless me by any stretch.
What names do you remember from grade school?
Well, I had Miss Goldwell, Miss Warner, I had Mr. Olson in 5th grade. He had a paddle that was shaped like a pig with big holes in it, you know, because paddling was big when you got older, and especially in junior high. People gave swats, and you know, the hoods would get lots of swats. Once in a while, even those of us who thought we were somewhat good would get swats for things. But
what about in high school?
Underachieve again. Again, a kid trying to find himself. Not really very self-assured about being good at anything, other than there was one thing I was known for in Burley. You know, I started winning trivia and sports contests when I was in 7th grade. 7th grade, I think I won my first newspaper prognostication contest. Is it over?
No.
Okay, and then, you know, they'd have trivia contests. I'd win every week, several times, because I knew everything about sports. And I can remember as a sophomore in high school, my sister was a junior, my brother's a senior, being asked to join the radio club because I knew a lot about sports, and they had a half-hour radio program on a KBAR radio, 12:30 on the dial every week. And so as I got involved in the club, I started writing the sports part of the program, and I would do the radio program. I did them almost always every week myself. So I was named vice president of the club and was radio clubber of the year as a sophomore. And when I was in radio club, there were two girls who were seniors who said, you know, they were the editors of the school newspaper, and they said, you really should go out for journalism because we need somebody who can write sports. Now, journalism was an honors class, and so I was not a journalist. However, my senior year, I took journalism. I don't know how I got in. Maybe it's just because I had an open class and they happened to have a need. And so there it was. Then the school newspaper came out, I think, every Friday, or is it every other Friday? And I was sports editor. I'd never written anything, and I sort of taught myself because I read a lot, and I started writing sports stuff. And as things developed, I was working construction at the time on some apartments my dad was building, and crashed into somebody's car and had to pay $1,000 to fix the car. And I knew I needed to make an effort to show my parents I was trying to pay for college. So I applied for a scholarship. I entered a writing contest from the Deseret News against students from 6 other states and won. With the story I wrote about a guy who had given up being a lawyer to be a fishing guide in Alaska. He had been a sports star at Burley High School, and I did a feature on him, of all things. Mr. Lee, who was my journalism professor, a teacher or advisor, really didn't know anything about writing, but he said, you know, that might be a good story, and he was right. And kind of very much by chance, I won this contest, and very much by chance then won a scholarship, and went to college and got involved in a program. Still didn't know anything about writing, and was named editor again without knowing anything, and sort of had to teach myself how to write, how to report, and kind of got in the blood. I'd always wanted to be a sports announcer when I was a kid, and I once sent in a card for a sports broadcasting school, and they'd sent somebody out to see me. Apparently I was 13 years old. I wasn't there when he showed up at the house. So I always seem to do things like that. I can remember as a kid there was some drawing for a big barbecue, and I had entered and hadn't separated the tickets, so the ticket was this long, and I'd won, you know. I don't know.
You always wanted to be a sports announcer growing up,
Yeah.
not an athlete?
Well, no, really. I never saw myself as athletically good at anything. So, no, I always wanted to be good. And when I got older, I bought weighted bats and, you know, started doing some things like that. But I was a decent athlete. But I didn't realize at the time, until I got older, how much thinking makes a difference in sports. I never really had anybody, until I was in college, teach me how to do a drop step or how to pivot, or, you know, the little things about training, you know, how to do things to be good. And, you know, the analysis part, I always loved that about sports, and so I never had seen myself as good enough to be athletic, you know. Again, the confidence thing.
You mentioned you won this contest competing against people from 6 other states. What did you win?
$500 scholarship. And getting my picture in the Deseret News with Jerry Cahill, who was the city editor of the Deseret News. I saw him later on my mission, and he said, hey, I have a picture of you. And, you know, it was a big deal.
How old were you when you won that?
Senior. They called me down to the office one morning. They said, you know, and I always went by Tony when I was growing up. So if you'd come down to the office and they said, oh, you won this scholarship. And I said, oh, good. And that's all I said. And I was supposed to react more. And they put my picture in the paw prints, you know, as winning this. And it was...
Huh. Why did you go by Tony growing up instead of Antone?
That's what they called me. And you know, when I was a first grader, I think I started getting girls' mail for Nancy Drew books, and somebody made fun of that name when I was in first grade. My Cub Scout leader about being a girl's name, and so the only time I wasn't shy in school or really was when they called me by that name. I would speak up pretty forcefully and tell them not to call me that. And even, you know, sequentially, you know, as the confidence came later in college, I realized, you know, I didn't have anything to be embarrassed about. It was unique, and so I was ready to. Even our state council, our guy in the stake presidency who was in my elders quorum president called me that. I hadn't realized when I changed after my mission. So
Was it when did you start going by Antone though?
really, it had been after my mission. But I had a college roommate my first year in college who was absolutely crazy and had so much self-confidence and so full of himself. And he liked the name, and he kind of started whispering to me. Chris Erickson is his name, from Billings, Montana. Chris would hitchhike and do everything wild, and you know, he just kind of got me to feel a little more self-confidence, and as socially things went well at Rick's, then I got more confidence to start being who I was, wanted to be, not who everybody thought I was.
Mm-hmm. What spiritual or religious experiences do you remember having growing up?
My sister's fast when she was having her heart surgery was probably one of the real first spiritual things that happened to me. And Dad was always very spiritual. We had a home evening, even though we hated it. But what we did like about it was that we had treats at the end. But
how long were your home evenings?
Half hour to 45 minutes.
Did your dad always give the lesson?
I don't think he hardly ever gave a lesson.
Describe what a home evening was like then.
We'd talk about some topic. We had the home evening manuals, it seemed like, at that point. So you'd go through one of the manuals.
Take turns giving lessons that you remember? Or?
Yeah, but it never really turned on. Didn't all fit until, you know, it became my idea instead of, you know, because we went through the seminary experience, and, you know, to my parents' credit, they never made a big deal if you bore your testimony, or didn't say, if you'll bear your testimony, I'll do this for you. That was never their tact at all. They never forced you to try to show emotion you didn't have naturally. But my brother Charles had been on mission, my sister Catherine, my brother Stephen, my brother Gordon. These missions, when they'd come back, really had an impact on me. And, you know, as the family was getting letters from Brazil or from, you know, Gordon went to Kentucky and Tennessee, and Catherine to Indiana and Michigan, and Stephen to the Navajo. I mean, they had an impact. And it was such a big deal, and they'd come home and they always seemed to be so together and so neat to see them come home, and that really had an impact on me and made me want to go on a mission, you know, real badly and be a together person. But I think fasting was the first time, and you know, I always prayed, but I think when I went to college is when it all started to bear fruit, and I got serious, and I realized the first Sunday I realized there's nobody to force me to go to church. I go to church if I want to, and I decided after a week I wanted to go to church. I didn't just go because I had to. I wanted to, and as a result, I think as the growth of the first semester of college, socially, as I dated 4 or 5 times a week, 3 or 4 different people a week, and I was a status person on campus, and you know, it sort of went through the whole evolution of being somebody, I thought anyway. I realized that fell back on the core values my parents taught me, and wanted to get ready for a mission and be more serious about the gospel. And really seize the opportunities that were ahead of me.
Did you read the Book of Mormon?
I think I did in seminary. If I read it, I don't think I studied it. Scripture reading wasn't a big deal growing up. The church has done such a fine job now making scriptures a part of day-to-day life for kids that we never really had. We had these Bible books, Bible stories books, where you had pictures, and I always looked at those. And I always knew a lot just from going to class, but I really didn't know anything, because nothing really went through me, stories, and as you start to live them and read them, then you see them a little differently. Oops.
It's a good place to stop.
Okay.